Hey guys, sorry for the long gap in videos being uploaded, and I'm sorry in advance too if this sounds like a little bit of a rant right now. In light of recent events, I've been kind of ticked off lately to see how the worldwide media, the political and economic establishment are reacting to the events in the east of Ukraine right now and with Russia. So, where to begin with all of this is where I stand is that I do not pick one side over the other in this fight. What Russia's invasion, to be sound a little bit more sophisticated than Kamala Harris was, the invasion of a sovereign nation by another nation is totally against the norms of the international system of law that was set up by not just by the United Nations, but by the world of civilized nations in the aftermath of the Second World War. So let's just get that out of the way right now and say that what Russia did to respond to this crisis is is by no means justified under any circumstances whatsoever. That being said, we need to look at what the other side is saying. And by the other side, I mean not even Ukraine. I'm talking about the West. I'm talking about the West, Western political leaders, Western media leaders, Western economic leaders, and why their virtue signaling about Russia, wanting to ultimately go to war with Russia, is so important. The Western worldwide propagandist media and their lackeys in the economic sphere and the political sphere is totally and completely invested in starting a war against Russia. Why would they ever want to do that, considering the fact that both the United States of America and the Russian Federation have nuclear weapons that would be cause for not only great concern, but would almost certainly destroy a good portion of the human population if actually used. Why does the Western worldwide media want war then so bad? Why are companies so fixed to cancel Russia and pour out vodka, even Russian vodka, even if it has nothing to do with Russia? Why are universities across the West canceling classes on Dostoevsky or Tolstoy from the syllabi? Why? Well, I think the first thing we need to look at is who is truly responsible for these events. And the fact of the matter is that in my opinion, that the crisis in the Ukraine is the fault primarily of the West. Now, that isn't, like I said, to say that the invasion of Russia of a sovereign territory is by any means justified, because it is not. Alright, but here's the thing. The United States, with its allies in NATO and in the EU, have used NATO and the EU as a proxy to expand its sphere of influence into Russia, into Russian territory. Now, Russia correctly feels threatened by the encroachment of Western powers that are historically and presently hostile to it from coming in contact with its borders. Putin is not being insane. He is not ill by any means. He is acting in a rational, predictable way in continuity to the Hobbesian idea that we live in a self-help system of war of all against all, at least in the sense of the international sphere. And when you feel threatened by encroachments and by troops being present not far away at all from your current borders, you would feel threatened. And Russia feels threatened because the United States, NATO, and the European Union have encroached upon Russia over and over again for the past 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union. This was not to be. the hallmark of the post-Cold War world. Despite what many people would have you believe, the understanding at the end of the Cold War, at least in the eyes of those who lost, was not that they would willingly and voluntarily necessarily go on and accept all of the West's demands in their way of life. It just meant that there would be no real chance of nuclear war. It did not mean that it was going to mimic the West and all of its shortcomings. That was not what it was about, and what the West took that as a means of pushing its liberal imperialist hegemony across the world. Now, why is the liberal woke left so committed to war in Russia, even though they don't have that same type of resentment and saber rattling that Stephen Colbert has when it comes to things like, I don't know, intervening against Saudi Arabia in its war against Yemen? Why isn't Stephen Colbert? Why isn't John Oliver? Why isn't Trevor Noah calling for war against Saudi Arabia, but is absolutely committed to war against Russia? Well, it is a clash of civilizations, as Samuel P. Huntington warned us about in 1993. But Samuel P. Huntington warned against a clash between Islamic civilization and what he called then, at least, what could have been called then Christian civilization, though we can't really call it Christian anymore. Western civilization has dismantled Christianity and is very, very close to dismantling classical learning of Plato and Aristotle and of high reason, and has moved on to a postmodern way of thinking. The belief that all reason and logic should be fixated on assumptions of power and of one group versus another, instead of looking toward what was always defined the rest, which is rule of law and reason above all else, which are principles that the far left now considers to be hallmarks of white privilege and of patriarchy. But they are not interested. So Christian civilization cannot really be called Christian civilization anymore. It is now the dying flows of a decadent culture. And we'll clump that with the West. And it doesn't want war with the with Arab civilization for multiculturalisms, because they think they can wokeify the Arab world with that disaster in Afghanistan. What they really want is to attack Eastern Orthodoxy, because that is truly the last vestiges of Christian civilization anywhere. Moscow is the third Rome. It is the third Rome, the successor to Byzantium, which was lost to the Turks in 1453, and Westerns and Christianity is on the verge of being lost again. And if Moscow falls and a Western-style liberal puppet is placed in it in Putin's stead, then I believe that all of Christianity will fall, and Christian civilization and the hallmarks of it and the hallmarks of classical learning will crumble to the ground, which is the goal of the Western worldwide leftist media talking heads. That is their goal. The West has brought this fight to Putin in order to promote liberal hegemony, no matter how many people need to die or how many people have to suffer. The fact of the matter is that before Russia rationally reacted to Ukraine's increasing antagonism with cutting off its oil supplies, Ukraine was doing just fine economically without the presence of NATO or the EU within its mix. And I believe that the other Eastern European countries would prosper just as fine. They do not need technocratic bullies in Brussels or technocratic scholars in Washington telling them how to live their lives and be able to be prosperous. That it is not one or the other between liberal imperialism and prosperity. You can have both. You can have prosperity without falling to the woke liberal mob, which is what the bosses in D.C. and Brussels and New York and Wall Street demand of you. So Ukraine needs to remain a neutral partner, which it has been, practically speaking, up until 2014, when the West bullied it into overthrowing a democratically elected president and installing a liberal puppet regime in its stead. And how the West bullied Russia into giving in. But Russia hasn't backed down because they've acted, like I said, rationally to this arbitration, to this antagonism by the Western leadership. And while, yes, of course, it is never good for another nation to attack another like this, we can't underestimate the fact that Saudi Arabia, one of our Arab allies, has consistently attacked other countries, such as Yemen. So where is the outrage there? I don't know. And it is because of the fact that the Western worldwide media is aligned with those forces that wish to undermine culture and civilization of the West. And Putin is one of the last people who want to preserve Christian civilization. Rome and Moscow should unite, not divide, unite, in restoring the common culture that underpins nearly 2/3 of the human population globally. But we won't. Not if the current trend continues. And before anyone here calls me a Putin stooge or a Putin apologist or Putinista, as I'm hearing, think about it from his perspective and from the perspective of his people. Not these paid actors who are working for the West and quote-unquote Radio Liberty. Look at it through the gaze of a man who feels that his country has been increasingly encroached upon on its sovereignty for too long, who demands some sense of accountability and wants to hold the West to its word when it comes to its liberal imperialist expansion. So I'm American Bonapartist, and thank you for listening.